recording our simple Tessalation tutorial, you can kind of just maybe watch me do it the first time, and then the second time maybe try to follow along, and then the third time you might want to be working on your own from this assignment. So the first part of this assignment, which it doesn't really show you how to do, is how to find and use good images off the internet. So what I really find is the best way to get a good image is going to Google and click on images up at the top here. And so now it's just searching for Google Images. And from my experience, this end result of the picture looks the best if you have a lot of contrast, a lot of different colors. So if you can find a picture that has a lot of different colors in it, it's going to look the best. So for example, the one I used was like the Star Wars poster, and the little chunk I took from it has a lot of really interesting colors in it. So the more colors you have, the better it looks. What would be something that somebody's taken a picture of that would have a lot of colors? Tie-dye. Tie-dye, let's try it. Tie-dye. Okay, and the cool thing with Google Images is it's going to just show us it's just going to show us images. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a great photo. So it's really important to use the settings toolbar right here up at the top. Click settings, tools. If you click on tools, you can put size, and I usually like to pick large. Because sometimes if you downloaded a picture off the internet, you might get like a little thumbnail, it's tiny, and then by the time you bring it into Photoshop, it's actually like pixelated. We want to try to avoid that. So I always try to look for a large image. And so I'm just going to look through here. If there's any that stand out, that have a lot of color to them, and a lot of variations in color, you could do anything too. But I think it was just a really good example that was shared with us. So I'm just going to click on that one, and it's going to show a bigger version of this image. You could potentially right-click, save, and download this, or you can click on View Image, and then that should put it in just its own web page, and that from there, that's what we're going to save. So if you're able to right-click, you can right-click and save, but remember, if you're on a new computer, it will not allow you to right-click until you have that set up. So I'm going to show you again how to set up your right-click in case you haven't done it, and you can follow along with this one if you know you haven't done it. The Apple symbol, System Preferences, and the mouse, and this should say on the right side, Secondary Button. Primary button is the right-click, right and then left-click, sorry. And there we go. So mine's set up correctly. If you have not changed this on your own, it'll say primary button on both sides. We don't want that. Questions? Have you set up your right-click on your computer mouse? Oh, you don't have one because it's not an Apple mouse. If you do not have a white Apple mouse, don't even worry about this. It's automatically set for you. It's actually one of the ways I prefer the PC mice, the gray mice. But, okay. And you'll see too, if I click on the image, it will zoom in. And there'll be like a little plus and minus. I can make it bigger or smaller. Whenever we're working with images, especially bringing them into Photoshop, we want to get the biggest image possible. The bigger the better. It cannot be too big for us. So right now, I made it big as I can. And I'm going to right-click. I'm going to hit Save Image As. Very important you know where it's going. I really love saving things to my desktop because I know if it's at my desktop, it's really easy to find. Sometimes it might go into your Downloads folder or your Documents folder, and then sometimes you might forget where it is. You might forget about it altogether. So I would really suggest that you put it on your desktop when you download a picture and change the name. So I might change this to tie-dye. That way I know the name of it and I know where it's saved. Those are two very important things. I'm just going to close those two pages. And so that's step one. Choose a photograph to select a cropped section from. That might not mean anything to you yet because it's a little bit of terminology with Photoshop, but it will make sense here pretty quick. Now I'm just going to jump into step two. Remember, you don't necessarily need to follow along. If you know how to do it, great. If not, don't worry. I'm going to go over this again. Open up Photoshop. So mine is in my dock, but yours probably isn't. So the way to find any any program on a Mac computer, you just go up here to the top right-hand corner to the little magnifying glass. It's called the Finder or Spotlight search, and just start typing it in. Photoshop. I have CS6, but you have CS4, so I'm going to use CS4. And you're going to see it's popped up in my dock down here. I'm actually going to right-click it, and I'm going to hit Options and Keep in Dock. That way, I know that whenever I'm on my computer again, I don't need to search for it every time. It's going to be on my dock. If you move to another computer, it's not going to be there. You're going to have to repeat that step. So it's kind of a pain in the butt that way, but that's how you make that happen. And if you've never seen Photoshop, this is how it looks when you open it up. I didn't open up anything in particular. There's kind of a menu bar up here. There's some toolbars on the left. There's some more colors on the right, and the whole open middle kind of weirds me out. Like I don't know what's happening. But it does tell you what to do. So now that we have Photoshop open, it says to hit File, New. So Photoshop, File, New. And then we get a pop-up just like the image down here. And I'll tell you, a very commonplace people make mistakes is in the default sizes where they put centimeters or inches. So sometimes if things aren't working out, like if the picture or the assignment just isn't working, you think you're following all the instructions and something just doesn't feel right or doesn't look right or it's not working the way you know it should, it's typically because of the wrong file size. Or sometimes when you bring in an image, it's saved as like a different type of file that we have some problems with. So if you ever find yourself saying like in Photoshop, hey, I don't think this is working like I think it should, tell me right away, because there are some little secret tricks that I know that can help save you a lot of time. The worst thing in the world for this class is for you to kind of get frustrated and like get fed up with it. Just ask me, because like I said, I've had about 15 years playing with this assignment or this program, so I know all of its little intricacies, whereas I don't expect you to know any of it. So make sure that says inches. If we go back to the assignment, it says to change the name to Simple Tessalation, and that's actually just it's a term for a repeating image. And it says width 8.5 inches, height 11 inches, and it also gives us a resolution and a color mode. Okay, I'm actually going to change one of those settings, and I'll tell you why. So a width is 8.5. Which is 8.5 inches. 0.5 is half an inch. Height, 11 inches. Make sure it says inches right here and not pixels or not anything else. Oh, and if you have a little scrolly wheel, you can see I just touched the scrolly wheel and it changed my size here. So I'm just going to highlight that again, hit 11. And where it says pixels per centimeter under the resolution, it has to say pixels per inch. So sometimes people get mixed up and they hit the wrong one. And that could actually make your file size way too big or way too small. So it's really important to try to follow along. The last little step in that assignment, it says to make the resolution 300 pixels per inch. I am going to actually change that to 72. And I'll tell you why. If you have like an HD TV or if you've heard like a 4K monitor, basically that refers to pixels. How many pixels you can cram on a screen. The more pixels are on a screen, the more like detail high def it is, and typically the better it looks. For our purposes, we don't need like a super high resolution image. So 72 is kind of the standard for all images going on the internet. And our hope is that when we're done the picture, we're putting it up on our blog. So whereas I had it 300, you'll see if you look at my image size, this is 1.39 megabytes at 72 resolution. If I had it 3, it's now 24.1 megabytes. So that's a huge difference in how big and how much information is there. And we don't need that amount of information. So I'm going to keep it at 72. I forgot to change the name, so I'm going to change the name right there. Simple Tessalation. I'm just going to hit OK. And then you're going to get a little white screen. A couple cool things to note is if you grab the bottom right-hand corner, you can kind of drag it to make it a little bit larger. I sometimes like to drag it about the size of the opening of my screen, just like that. And another little hint is if you look down at your keyboard and next to the spacebar there's that command. If you go command plus or command minus, that's how you zoom in or out. So that can actually be very helpful in many of the assignments to come. When you have to zoom into something, command plus and command minus are very helpful. I'm going to start writing some of these shortcuts on the board so that you don't need to memorize them, but you just know like, hey, there's a whole bunch of shortcuts on the board. You might use them. You don't have to use them, but I guarantee it'll save you a lot of time. I personally like to have gray all around my image, just like this, so that I can, like, that's how my brain figures out, hey, that's the entire image. That's the piece of paper. I have seen people make the mistake when it's like this. They can see the edges of the side, but you can't tell if it's at the top or the bottom. And sometimes with this assignment, they forget to do the bottom because they didn't zoom out to check to see if that was the whole image. And that can kind of mess you up too. Can't log in? Okay. I'll log you in for right now. So go need to. Well, actually, what if you guys can just log in your account for now? And I'll give you a hand after. Okay, so continuing on here, we'll go to step 3. It says open up a photograph. So this is where we had to find the photo that we've opened before. And I'll show you how to open up a new photo. So it's File, Open. And then we have to try to navigate or figure out where we put that file. And remember I said it's really important to put it on the desktop. So there it is, and I remember naming it tie-dye. So I just click on that and open. Sometimes you'll see different file types. JPEG is probably the most common image file type on the internet. Sometimes if you have different than JPEG, you might run into issues. Again, if you feel like something isn't working and you're doing everything right, come talk to me right away because it's probably something weird that I don't expect you to know. So the next part of the instruction just said, hey, open up the image. I've done that. And now we're getting into learning some of the tools in Photoshop. A very useful tool. And it can be kind of a pain in the butt, this tool, if you don't know how to use it properly. So use the rectangle marquee tool to select a section of your picture. I know in this example, I'm going to zoom in, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's kind of like a dotted line at the cruise ship. And that's kind of what the rectangle marquee looks like when you're using it. I'll show you on my example. So the rectangle marquee tool is on the toolbar on the side. It's the left-hand side, and it's the second one from the top. It looks like a little dotted square. And if I click on it, you should see now that little square is like a darker gray. That means I'm using that tool. And so it says make a selection on my image. So again, using my tip, it said pick a section that has a lot of color. So I'm just going to make a little highlight, click, drag, and hold. And you can kind of see it's like dancing little lines. They're like ants, right? That's the section of this image I'm going to steal, right? And so to use the rectangle marquee tool, you just click, drag, and hold. If I'm not happy with that square, let's say I want it somewhere else. Let's say I want it like right here. All I do is just click, drag, and hold again. That's all. So pretty easy. You're just going to click, drag, and hold till you find a chunk of the image you like. And then let's check the instructions again. Copy and paste. So the biggest difference between a Mac and a PC computer is you might be used to like Control V and Control C. Mac is the same. They just call it Command. So it's Command C, Command V. It's even in the same spot. They just call it something different. So we're going to show you the two different ways. You can either hit Edit Copy or just use that shortcut Command C or Command V. So go back to the image that has the copy. Right there. I'm going to hit Command C on my keyboard. It looks like it did nothing because it really did until I paste it. Okay, I'm going to go back to my simple Tessalation page and I'm going to hit Command V. So this is very common. It's a huge square and it's not going to work out really well for the assignment. The smaller the square is, the cooler and more intricate the picture looks. So I have to change that image size. So I'm going to be doing that by hitting Command T to edit free transform. I'll show you that trick right now. So it doesn't actually explain it really well in the instructions, but now that I've pasted it, I can hit Command T, and now you get these little things called nodes. They're little squares all around the image, and I'm sure if you've played with like MS Paint or even Microsoft Word, it's just how you change the size of an image. So I'm going to kind of make it small like this. Perfect, like that. And if I want those nodes to go away, all I do is I hit enter. And now it's my perfect little image again. But remember, we have a tool selected. And if we want to move that little square, which we will have to, we have to click on the move tool up here. So I can grab that move tool, and I'm going to move it to the top left-hand corner. You're going to find that it wants to be there, like snaps in place. So that's really helpful. And then we're going to copy and flip the image. Okay, so I'm going to go to Photoshop. If you don't see layers here, you can always go click Window Layers. Lots of times I will find that students are working on an assignment and their Photoshop doesn't look like the person's next to theirs. It's not hard to accidentally like close one of these things or delete it. So it's really important that if your Photoshop doesn't look the way you think it should look, ask the person next to you to just click on their window tab and see what they have checked off. More often than not, you just have something like layers turned off, and you can see there all those layers go away. A little bit about the layers itself. And remember, guys, I know this is a ton of information to take in. You've never seen this program before, and I'm throwing so much at you at once. That's why I'm recording it, so that we're going to put that up. You can review it as many times as you want, and I can help you get through any problem sections. One thing I like to do is delete this background layer, because it will save you from some potential problems later on, which I know are very common from doing this assignment many times. So on the layers, these are just everything you've brought into your Photoshop assignment. I like to think of it as like a wedding cake. If you look at the very top of a wedding cake, like a tiered wedding cake, you see all the layers stacked, right? From the littlest layer on top to the biggest layer on the bottom. The layers in Photoshop are very similar. Whatever's on top is what you're going to see first. So for example, if I unlock this and drag this layer above my layer 1, it's as if that image never existed. Because if you think about it, that bottom layer is a big white piece of paper. So it's hiding my image underneath. So I'm just going to drag this layer to the little garbage can at the bottom and get rid of it. So all I did there is that layer had a lock on it. Sometimes all background layers will have a lock. It'll look just like this. And the lock is meant to prevent you from making changes that you don't want to make. So kind of helpful in that regard. But let's say I do want to make changes to that layer. I could actually just click on the lock symbol again if I have my layer highlighted. And now if I want to get rid of it, I just drag that layer to the garbage can. And it's kind of hard to see on my big screen there, but it's not the garbage can of the computer, like you're deleting a file. It's the garbage can on the layers underneath here, down the bottom right-hand corner. So right now, I have a checkerboard background, which just means that there's nothing there, it's blank. And I have a little square up here. So here's where some of the magic for the assignment comes into play. I'm going to copy and then flip the image. And don't worry if you're lost just yet. I'm going to go over it a couple more times. I just kind of want you to get a general sense of what we're doing before we get into it with you guys. We have all of today to do this and part of tomorrow as well. So to duplicate, there's a couple different ways. I find the best way to duplicate an image or a layer is right-clicking on it, and you can actually click on Duplicate Layer. And it'll say, okay, what do you want to do? I'll just hit OK. So now, technically, I have two images that are the exact same. And remember that they're stacked one on top of each other, so it doesn't look like there's two. But because I have my move tool on, I can grab it and I can move it anywhere. So what you want to do is you want to move it just beside the original image. And I'm going to zoom in for you so you can kind of get a really good sense of what this looks like, because this is one of the cool things. So the image just looks like you put two images together. But now I'm going to hit Command T to free transform it, which is, it's all in the instructions. I just kind of have this memorized. Hit Command T, and that's how we change those sizes again. But right in the middle, if I grab this node right in the middle and drag it, I can actually flip it over on the original image, just like that, and hit enter. And if I move it, the image lines up perfectly. So that is basically it's the major step of this assignment. So now that I have one image flipped, just like that, let's go back to the instructions just so we're not too far off. We're going to combine the layers. There's a shortcut for that. I'll show you the shortcut, or I'll show you how to do it as well. So the shortcut is Command E. So if I'm clicked on the top layer and hit Command E, that just combined those into the one layer. And now all I have to do, I don't need to flip images horizontally anymore. I just duplicate it. And I'm going to move it over. Don't worry if you're lost yet. It's no problem. I'm going to go over it again. So if you look at the image, it's just a repeating mirror of itself. It kind of looks like crazy owl eyes. And I'm going to continue repeating those steps. That's all the assignment tells me to do. Command E merges these two layers. I'm going to right click on them, duplicate them, hit enter. And now if I zoom back out, you're going to see that if I move this image over, it's going to go off my screen on my right side. That's okay. All I do is I'm going to repeat the step of merging the layers, Command E. And if you want, you can actually move it so that your image is symmetrical. Who can tell me what symmetrical means? Equal both sides, exactly. So it's not a requirement of the assignment to make it equal to both sides, but if you have like OCD and like things to look a certain way, I find usually those students always like to make sure everything's perfect, and that's just the way I work. So right now we have one image layer because we've merged all those layers. And all we're doing is following the assignment. The next one is to flip it down, just like we flipped it to the side. So a really common thing people will do on this assignment is they won't merge layers because they're going too fast. And if you don't merge the layers, it won't work. So it's all about following the instructions fairly well. And you should only have ever one or two layers, ever, never more than one or two. So again, to flip it down, it's the same thing we did to flip it sideways. I'm going to duplicate it by right-clicking on the layer, duplicate layer, hit OK. So now we have this big layer. I'm just going to drag it straight down. And actually, that kind of almost looks like it fits. But remember, we have to do that flipping over onto itself. Hit Command T, drag it up, hit Enter, drag it down. So that was a kind of a complicated. Sorry, is that somebody at the door? Oh, okay, sorry. Door's locked. So yeah, I'll repeat that step right now because it can seem a little bit complicated. Also, a really good tip in Photoshop: if you've made a mistake, just stop. Don't keep making the mistake. If you hit Command Z, it'll undo anything that you just did. So if you've made a mistake, Command Z is your friend. But if you made a mistake and then made 100 different things after it, like tried to click and tried to figure it out, Command Z will only undo so many times, right? So it's sometimes hard for me to help you if you tried so many things after you made a mistake. So if you make a mistake, just stop and ask me for help, and I'll make it work. So I'm going to repeat that step again. Once you have the one layer, right click, duplicate it. There you go. So now we have two layers. I'm just going to drag it down. And you should make sure it lines up. I'm going to just zoom in so you can really see. So sometimes people will have it like off center just a little bit. And then when you flip it, it doesn't look good. So just make sure it's lined up. And again, it will snap to itself as well. Hit Command T. That gives you those nodes again. And then you just drag it over top of the original image. That's how we know it's the exact same size. Hit Enter. And then just pull it down. And so now, if we look really carefully, we have a repeating pattern of our very first center. And now all we do, just like how we copied it and went right, we're just going to copy it and go down. So Command E merges it. Then we're going to duplicate it and hit OK. And then just drag down. Make sure it's lined up. And this is where we do Command E again to merge. Right click, duplicate. Perfect. Dragging down. Awesome. Command E, right click, duplicate. You could see this assignment is a lot of repeated steps. And again, that's just so that we can teach you a few of those commands really well. Okay, so there we go. Again, like I said, we should never have more than one or two layers at a time. So I'll hit Command E to merge. So now I have one image, and if I want it to be symmetrical, I would just use my up key. And now I think if we zoom in, it's a repeating pattern. So you can see, like I said before, the brighter the picture, the more colors in your picture, the better it'll look. But every picture you do this to will look totally different. And I know that's a ton of information to take in because it's learning, like we learned 10 different tools in one assignment. That's why I'll show you how to save it. And then we can move on and I will show you everything again. And I could focus more on any of the steps you wanted to know. But to save an image, all you need to do is go File, Save. You'll get a pop-up. And it will, usually if you named your file, like we did when we hit File, New, it will automatically put that name in. And it'll say .psd. .psd is a very important file type if you want to work on that again. It stands for Photoshop Document. If you change that to a JPEG or any of these other formats, GIF, BMP, PNG, etc., you will not be able to open it in Photoshop and have all your layers there. So sometimes, like later on in the assignment, for example, the alphabet photography assignment, you're actually going to have over 26 layers because you're going to have a layer for every letter of the alphabet and a grid, right? So it's important to make sure that you know how the layers work. And I don't expect you to get that assignment done in one class. So you'd have to come back the next class, and if you didn't save it properly, you're going to lose all of the layers and all your work. So really important that when you start working, hit File, Save, make sure it's named as something .psd, and where it says Where, again, I usually would suggest desktop, and just hit Save. And there you go. I know it's saved now. Also really good to save your photos as you're working. Just because if something happens to your computer, it crashes or restarts or anything, you're going to lose everything up until the last time you saved. So I see this every year. It happens to somebody and I feel so bad, but it's because they didn't save. They'll lose a whole class worth of work. And I don't want you to have to do that. If it ever does happen to you, I can usually help get you through some of them really quickly. But I just want to avoid it altogether by making sure we save. So right now, this is my completed assignment. That's totally done, and it's awesome. So what are the areas that you said like, hey, this is crazy and want me to focus more on? Resize it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this recording and I will start uploading it. But I'm going to write some of the shortcuts on the board because some of those shortcuts you're going to be going to all the time, and it's really helpful. So I'm just going to stop the recording here.